I'm Dr. Isabella Ravencroft, and I've been a trauma surgeon at Blackthorne Memorial Hospital in Savannah, Georgia for 17 years. Or at least I was, until I submitted my resignation and moved to a small clinic in rural Montana last month. During my career, I've performed over 3,200 emergency surgeries, saved countless lives that arrived at death's door, and witnessed the incredible power of modern medicine to pull people back from the brink. But what I'm about to tell you about are 4 cases, 4 women who entered my operating room, that made me question not just everything I knew about surgery, but whether some operating rooms develop a memory of their own. These aren't stories about medical miracles or inspiring recoveries. These are stories about the nights when operating room 7 became something else entirely, something that still wakes me up in cold sweats, and made me realize that some patients bring more than just medical emergencies through those doors. They bring the supernatural, the unexplainable, and sometimes the dead who refuse to stay buried. What you're about to hear happened between October 2023 and March 2024. 4 cases, 4 women, 4 impossible events that shattered my understanding of life, death, and what lies in between. By the time I witnessed the 4th case, I knew I could never set foot in an operating room again. Blackthorne Memorial Hospital sits in the heart of Savannah's historic district, built in 1892, on the site of what was once Magnolia Plantation Slave Cemetery. The hospital has a reputation, not just for excellent trauma care, but for the inexplicable events that seem to cluster around certain wings, certain rooms, and most notably, Operating Room 7. As the chief of trauma surgery, I'd worked in OR 7 hundreds of times over my career. It was our most advanced surgical suite, equipped with the latest technology, and positioned closest to the emergency department for critical cases. But it also had quirks that we'd learned to accept as part of the building's age and history. Instruments would sometimes move slightly between procedures, even when the room was locked and empty. The temperature would drop unexpectedly during certain surgeries. Most unsettling of all, nurses reported hearing whispers in the walls during late-night procedures, always women's voices, always speaking in languages no one could identify. My surgical team was the best in Georgia. My lead surgical nurse, Ophelia Blackwood, had worked trauma for 15 years and possessed an almost supernatural ability to anticipate my every move. Dr. Lysander Cross, my anesthesiologist, was renowned throughout the Southeast for his precision and skill. My surgical technician, Celeste Moonwright, kept our OR running with clockwork efficiency despite the room's peculiarities. We'd grown accustomed to OR 7's eccentricities. We thought we understood its moods and rhythms. We were wrong. The hospital serves not just Savannah but the entire coastal Georgia region, including some of the most remote and superstitious communities in the American South. We regularly treated patients from the Sea Islands, where Gula traditions run deep, and from backwoods communities where folk medicine and modern healthcare exist in uneasy tension. But nothing in my medical training or cultural experience had prepared me for what began happening in OR 7 that October night. October 13th, I remember the date because it was Friday the 13th, and our night shift team had joked about expecting unusual cases. We had no idea how prophetic that would prove to be. My pager buzzed at 11:47 p.m. with an urgent message from Dr. Cordelia Ashworth in emergency. Incoming trauma, ETA 12 minutes. Female, mid-30s, massive internal bleeding from unknown cause. Conscious but critical, need OR 7 prepped immediately. Isabella, this one feels different. That last line gave me pause. Dr. Ashworth had 23 years of emergency medicine experience. She didn't use words like feels different lightly. I made my way to OR 7, where my team was already preparing. The familiar chill hit me as I entered. OR 7 was always several degrees cooler than the other operating rooms, something maintenance could never explain. Tonight it felt positively Arctic. Room temperature? I asked Celeste as I scrubbed in. 62 degrees and dropping, she replied, her breath visible in the air. HVAC says the system is functioning normally. The paramedics wheeled in our patient at exactly midnight. Magnolia Esperanza Thornfield, 34 years old, originally from somewhere deep in the Georgia coastal islands. Even on the gurney, bleeding internally and in obvious distress, she was strikingly beautiful, the kind of otherworldly beauty you see in old paintings of Celtic goddesses or Southern Gothic novels. Her medical history was sparse. No known allergies, no previous surgeries, no chronic conditions. But what struck me immediately was her eyes. They were the palest green I'd ever seen, almost translucent, and they seemed to track everything happening in the room with unsettling awareness. What happened to her? I asked the lead paramedic as we transferred Magnolia to the operating table. That's the thing, Doc. Nobody knows. Her landlord found her collapsed in her apartment, bleeding from her mouth and nose. No signs of trauma, no evidence of an accident or assault, but she's losing blood fast internally, from what we can tell. As we began our initial examination, Magnolia's condition presented a medical puzzle that made no sense. Her vital signs were unstable, blood pressure dropping, heart rate elevated, but she was conscious and coherent. Ma'am, can you tell me what happened? I asked as Ophelia prepared her IV lines. Magnolia looked directly at me with those translucent green eyes, and spoke in a voice that was both Southern honey and something much older. "The ancestors are calling me home, doctor, but I'm not ready to go. Not yet." "What ancestors? Are you referring to family members? The women who walked this land before it was a hospital, before it was a plantation? They're buried beneath us, and they're impatient." I exchanged glances with Dr. Cross. Patients often said strange things under stress or blood loss, but something about Magnolia's tone was different. She wasn't delirious. She was matter-of-fact, as if she was discussing the weather. "We're going to take good care of you," I assured her as we prepped for surgery. "Dr. Cross is going to give you something to help you sleep, and we'll find out what's causing the bleeding." As the anesthesia began to take effect, Magnolia gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Doctor, whatever you find inside me, don't remove it. Promise me you won't remove it." "Remove what?" But she was already under. We began the exploratory surgery at 12:23 a.m. Based on her symptoms, I expected to find a ruptured organ, internal trauma, or perhaps an undiagnosed condition causing the hemorrhaging. What I found instead defied every principle of medicine I'd ever learned. Magnolia Thornfield's internal organs were perfectly healthy, but they weren't alone. Growing throughout her abdominal cavity, intertwined with her intestines and wrapped around her liver, was what appeared to be an extensive root system, not cancerous growths or tumors, actual plant roots, complete with tiny root hairs and nodes. They pulsed with their own rhythm, independent of her heartbeat. "Ophelia, are you seeing this?" I asked, my voice barely steady. I don't know what I'm seeing," she replied. "Those look like tree roots." Dr. Cross finished from his position at the anesthesia station. "They look like tree roots growing inside her body." The roots were beautiful in their own terrifying way, silvery white, with delicate branching patterns that seemed to follow the natural architecture of her organs. They weren't damaging anything. In fact, they seemed to be supporting her organ function, providing some kind of additional vascular network. But they were bleeding. Tiny droplets of deep red blood wept from the root tips, pooling in her abdominal cavity. This was the source of her internal hemorrhaging, not organ damage, but bleeding from an impossible botanical system growing inside her body. "How is this possible?" Celeste whispered. I had no answer. In 17 years of surgery, I'd seen foreign objects swallowed or inserted into bodies. I'd seen bizarre tumors and rare conditions, but I'd never seen anything like living plant matter integrated into a patient's organ system. As I contemplated how to proceed, Magnolia spoke again. This should have been impossible. She was under deep general anesthesia, intubated, with no brain activity that should have allowed consciousness, but her voice filled the operating room, clear and conversational. "I told you not to remove them, doctor." We all froze. Dr. Cross frantically checked his monitors. "She's under deep anesthesia. EEG shows no consciousness. This shouldn't be happening." "The roots aren't mine," Magnolia's voice continued, coming from her unconscious body. "They belong to Serafina Moss, who was buried beneath this hospital in 1847. She was a root doctor, a healer from the islands. They burned her as a witch, but her medicine lived on." "This is impossible," I muttered. "You're a woman of science, Dr. Ravencroft, but you're operating on land where science and spirit intersect. Serafina's roots have been growing for 176 years, waiting for the right host, someone who could carry her healing knowledge forward." I looked at the monitors. Magnolia's vital signs were actually improving as she spoke. The bleeding from the roots was slowing. "Why you?" I asked, feeling foolish for having a conversation with an unconscious patient. "Because I'm the 7th-generation granddaughter of one of her apprentices. The roots recognize bloodline, even after all these years." While maintaining the surgery, I had Celeste pull up historical records on the hospital's database. What she found made my hands tremble as I held my surgical instruments. "Dr. Ravencroft," she said quietly, "there are records of a Serafina Moss. She was tried for witchcraft in Savannah in 1847, accused of practicing root medicine and healing with plants. She was burned at the stake on October 13th. Today was October 13th, 2023, exactly 176 years later. The land records show that Magnolia Plantation's slave cemetery was located precisely where OR7 now stands. There are burial records for dozens of unnamed individuals, but one name appears: Serafina, root woman burned for healing. I stared down at the root system growing inside my patient. Was I looking at the continuation of a 176-year-old botanical healing practice that had somehow survived underground, waiting for a genetic descendant to serve as its host? Against every medical protocol I'd ever learned, I made the decision to leave the root system intact. Magnolia's vital signs had stabilized, the bleeding had stopped, and removing the roots might kill both her and whatever ancient healing knowledge they represented.
We cleaned the abdominal cavity, ensured no infection was present, and closed her up with the impossible botanical network still growing inside her body. As the anesthesia wore off, Magnolia returned to normal consciousness with full memory of our conversation during surgery. "Thank you for listening," she said simply. "Serafina's medicine can continue now. How do you feel?" like I'm connected to something much larger than myself, like I'm carrying the wisdom of generations of healers. She paused, touching her sutured abdomen, and I can feel her knowledge flowing through me. I know things about plants and healing that I never learned. Magnolia Esperanza Thornfield remained in the hospital for observation for 5 days. During that time, she demonstrated knowledge of herbal medicine and traditional healing practices that she claimed to have never studied. She correctly diagnosed conditions in other patients just by being near them, and she began requesting specific plants and herbs that she said would aid her recovery. More unsettling, other patients began seeking her out. Word spread through the hospital that there was a woman in room 312 who could see illnesses before they manifested, who could recommend treatments that the medical staff hadn't considered. Dr. Ashworth consulted with me on the 3rd day. "Isabella, I've been practicing emergency medicine for over 2 decades, and I've never seen anything like this." She correctly predicted that Mrs. Chen in 307 would develop complications from her surgery, 2 days before our test showed any problems. She told Mr. Rodriguez that his chest pain wasn't cardiac, but was related to anxiety about his deceased father, information we couldn't have known, and that proved accurate after psychiatric evaluation. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that whatever happened in OR7, whatever those roots are doing inside her body, they've given her abilities that shouldn't exist." On her final night in the hospital, I made rounds to check on Magnolia. I found her room filled with plants, not hospital flowers, but wild specimens that seemed to have grown overnight in the water glasses and IV bags her visitors had left behind. "They grow for me now," she explained when she saw my shocked expression. "Seraphina's connection to the plant world flows through me. I can feel what each plant can heal, what each root can cure. This is medically impossible. Dr. Ravencroft, you opened my body and found a root system that had been growing for 176 years. You spoke with me while I was unconscious under anesthesia. You know that medically impossible doesn't cover everything that happens in this world." She was right, but accepting that felt like abandoning everything I'd built my career on. "There are 3 more women coming," Magnolia said quietly. 3 more who carry the bloodlines of the women buried beneath this hospital. OR7 will call to them, just as it called to me. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because Seraphina isn't the only one buried beneath your operating room. There were 4 women in total, 4 healers who were killed for their knowledge, 4 whose spirits have been waiting for their descendants to come home." Magnolia was discharged on October 18th, with the root system still growing inside her body. Her follow-up x-rays showed that the roots had actually expanded, creating an even more complex internal network. But rather than causing problems, they seemed to be enhancing her organ function. Her blood work was perfect, her healing rate was accelerated, and she reported feeling more energetic and healthy than she'd ever felt in her life. She left me with a warning and a prediction. "Dr. Ravencroft, OR7 remembers every woman who has died in that room. It remembers their pain, their knowledge, and their unfinished business. What happened to me is just the beginning. The other 3 are coming, and each case will be more intense than the last." "How do you know there will be others?" "Because I can feel them in the roots now. Their bloodlines call to the spirits beneath the hospital, and the spirits are getting restless." As she walked out of Blackthorne Memorial Hospital, plants began growing in her footsteps, literally sprouting from the cracks in the sidewalk where she stepped. I watched through my office window as she made her way to the parking lot, leaving behind a trail of green growth that shouldn't have been able to survive in concrete. That's when I knew that everything I understood about medicine, about life and death, about what was possible in the sterile scientific environment of a modern hospital, was about to change forever. In the weeks following Magnolia's surgery, OR7 began exhibiting new behaviors. The temperature drops became more pronounced. Surgical instruments would be found arranged in patterns that resembled root systems. Most unsettling of all, the walls began to show what appeared to be organic growth, thin, vine-like patterns that seemed to spread a little further each night. Maintenance insisted it was water damage or mineral deposits from the old pipes, but I knew better. OR7 was changing, responding to whatever had awakened during Magnolia's surgery. My surgical team began reporting strange dreams, visions of women in 19th century clothing standing around the operating table, watching our procedures with intense interest. Ophelia started speaking phrases in Gula during surgeries, words she claimed to have never learned. Dr. Cross began incorporating what he called intuitive anesthesia, somehow knowing exactly what each patient needed without consulting standard protocols. We were all changing, influenced by whatever ancient knowledge was stirring beneath the hospital. 3 weeks after Magnolia's discharge, I received a call that chilled me to the bone. It was from Dr. Ashworth in emergency. "Isabella, we've got another one coming in. Female,
mid-30s, massive internal bleeding from unknown cause. But this one's different. She was found in the old Bonaventure Cemetery, lying on a grave dated 1852. She's conscious, talking about returning to the place of healing, and asking specifically for OR7. What's her name? Cordelia Nightshade. And Isabella. She has the same eyes as Magnolia, that pale green color that seems to look right through you. As I prepared for what I knew would be the second impossible case, I realized that Magnolia had been right. OR7 wasn't just an operating room anymore. It had become a conduit between the world of the living and the spirits of women who had been murdered for their healing knowledge over 150 years ago. 4 women, 4 bloodlines, 4 supernatural cases that would push my understanding of medicine, science, and reality to the breaking point. The second woman was already on her way, and I had the terrible certainty that her case would be even more disturbing than Magnolia's impossible root system, because whatever forces were awakening beneath Blackthorne Memorial Hospital were growing stronger, more confident and hungrier for the completion of their centuries-old plan. What I was about to witness in the coming weeks would make Magnolia's botanical impossibility seem almost mundane by comparison, because some spirits don't just want to be remembered, they want to live again, through whatever means necessary. And OR7 was about to become the birthplace of something that should have stayed buried. After Magnolia Esperanza Thornfield left Blackthorne Memorial Hospital with an ancient root system growing inside her body, I thought I had witnessed the most impossible case of my medical career. A 176-year-old botanical network, connected to a murdered healer named Serafina Moss, had somehow found its genetic descendant and created a living bridge between past and present. But Magnolia had warned me. There were 3 more women coming. 3 more bloodlines connected to the spirits buried beneath Operating Room 7. What I was about to experience over the next 5 months would make her impossible root system seem like a minor medical anomaly. By the time the 4th and final case arrived in March 2024, I would understand that OR7 had never been just an operating room. It had been a resurrection chamber, waiting over a century and a half for the right moment to bring 4 murdered healers back to life through their living descendants. This is the story of how the dead reclaimed their healing knowledge, and why I could never practice surgery again. 3 weeks after Magnolia's discharge, Cordelia Nightshade arrived at Blackthorne Memorial on November 7, 2023. She was found unconscious in Bonaventure Cemetery, lying across the grave of Evangeline, herb woman, died 1852. Like Magnolia, she was bleeding internally from no apparent cause, and like Magnolia, she had those same translucent pale green eyes. But Cordelia was different in disturbing ways that became apparent the moment she entered OR7. The temperature didn't just drop, it plummeted to 48 degrees. Frost began forming on the surgical instruments, and most unsettling of all, the fluorescent lights began flickering in a pattern that seemed almost like communication. "Dr. Ravencroft," Ophelia whispered as we prepped Cordelia for surgery. "Look at her hair." I looked closer and felt my blood freeze. Tiny flowers were growing from Cordelia's scalp, not placed there but actually sprouting from her hair follicles. Delicate white blossoms that seemed to pulse with their own bioluminescence. "How long has she been unconscious?" I asked the paramedic. "That's the thing, Doc. She wasn't unconscious when we found her. She was gardening at midnight in November, planting flowers on a 170-year-old grave with her bare hands. She only lost consciousness when we tried to move her." When I opened Cordelia Nightshade's abdomen, I found something that made Magnolia's root system look almost normal by comparison. Her internal organs were host to an entire ecosystem of insects, butterflies, beetles, moths, and species I couldn't identify. But these weren't just any insects. They were all extinct species, some that had been gone for over a century, all of them very much alive and thriving inside her body. "My God," Dr. Cross breathed. "Those Xerces blue butterflies, they've been extinct since 1943. The insects had created a complex symbiotic relationship with Cordelia's organs. Butterflies pollinated what appeared to be flowering tissue, growing along her intestinal walls. Beetles processed waste materials, somehow purifying her blood. Moths with wings like stained glass windows clustered around her heart, their wing beats synchronized with her cardiac rhythm. As impossible as it seemed, the extinct insect colony was actually enhancing her physiological functions. But like Magnolia's roots, they were bleeding, not blood, but a golden nectar that smelled like honeysuckle and carried an otherworldly luminescence. Under deep anesthesia, Cordelia began speaking in what sounded like multiple voices, different accents, different speech patterns, as if several people were using her vocal cords simultaneously. "Dr. Ravencroft," came the first voice, cultured and refined. "I am Evangeline Whitmore, They burned me in 1852 for healing children with my butterfly medicine. A second voice, rougher and older. I'm Sister Mary Catherine. The church accused me of witchcraft because I could communicate with God's smallest creatures. They buried me alive in 1859. A third voice, younger and frightened. I'm Rebecca Moonchild. I was only 16 when they drowned me for keeping extinct butterflies alive through the winter of 1861. 3 women. I whispered. 3 healers. 3 women whose knowledge of insect medicine died with them. Cordelia's normal voice interjected. Until now, the butterflies and beetles have been waiting in the space between life and death, preserving their healing properties for the right host. I looked at the impossible ecosystem thriving inside her body. What do you need from me? Let us live. All 4 voices said in unison. Let the medicine continue. On January 15, 2024, Luna Shadowmere was brought to our emergency department in a condition that defied not just medical explanation, but the laws of physics themselves. She had been found in her apartment, which had somehow become completely frozen despite the heating system working perfectly. The temperature inside her apartment was -10 degrees Fahrenheit, but she was alive, conscious, and speaking normally. Her body temperature registered as 62 degrees Fahrenheit, a reading that should have meant death hours earlier. She keeps saying she needs to get to the cold room, Dr. Ashworth told me as we rushed Luna to OR7. She specifically asked for the operating room that remembers winter. When Luna entered OR7, something unprecedented happened. The room's mysterious temperature drops, which we'd grown accustomed to, intensified until frost covered every surface. Our breath came out in visible clouds, and the surgical instruments became so cold they burned to touch. But Luna seemed comfortable, even relieved. Finally, she said as we lifted her onto the operating table, I've been burning up for weeks. When I opened Luna Shadowmere's chest cavity, I found organs that had partially crystallized, not damaged or frozen, but transformed into living ice sculptures that continued to function perfectly. Her heart was a work of art, translucent crystal that pulsed with blue light. Her lungs were delicate ice formations that somehow processed oxygen more efficiently than normal tissue. But the most impossible discovery was what surrounded her crystallized organs, the perfectly preserved bodies of women in 19th century clothing, shrunk to microscopic size but visible under the surgical lights like living sculptures frozen in ice. Dr. Cross, are you seeing this? I'm seeing what appears to be miniaturized human figures preserved in ice crystals inside her organs. This is... I don't even have words. As I examined the crystallized heart more closely, I realized the tiny figures weren't random. They were positioned as if performing medical procedures, their microscopic hands working on even tinier patients. Under anesthesia, Luna's voice became an arctic wind that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Dr. Ravencroft, I am Isadora Frostborn, the ice healer. They accused me of bringing unnatural winter to heal fever and infection. They burned me, but my spirit retreated into the cold spaces between seasons. I am Celeste Winterheart. I could preserve life by slowing it down, keeping the dying in suspended animation until cures could be found. They said I was delaying God's will. I am Aurora Coldmoon. My touch could stop infection by freezing it out of the body. They called it devil's work, and buried me in summer heat to break my connection to winter. Luna's own voice joined them. 3 women whose ice medicine could have saved thousands. They've been waiting in the spaces between frozen and living, preserving healing knowledge in crystallized form. The tiny figures in her organs, I whispered, understanding flooding through me. They're not just preserved spirits, they're medical knowledge made manifest. Every procedure they ever performed, every patient they ever saved, every healing technique they developed, all of it crystallized and kept alive in ice. And now it lives in me. On March 21st, 2024, the spring equinox, a woman walked into Blackthorne Memorial Hospital who should have been impossible. She gave her name as Serafina Moss, appeared to be in her 30s, and had an appointment she claimed to have made 177 years ago. She was Magnolia Esperanza Thornfield, but transformed beyond recognition. The root system inside her body had continued growing, and now organic patterns covered her skin like living tattoos. Flowers bloomed in her hair with each breath, and when she walked, plants sprouted in her footsteps. Dr. Ravencroft, she said, her voice now carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate from the earth itself. It's time for the final procedure. The 4 bloodlines have been prepared. The 4 women are ready to be reborn. Magnolia, what are you talking about? I'm not Magnolia anymore. I'm Serafina Moss, returned through her willing body. And I'm here to collect my sisters. Within an hour, Cordelia Nightshade and Luna Shadowmere arrived at the hospital on their own. They moved with purpose that seemed beyond their conscious control, drawn by forces I couldn't understand. When all four women, Magnolia/Seraphina, Cordelia, Luna, and a fourth woman I'd never seen who introduced herself as Raven Thornwick, blood descendant of mortality Blackthorne, entered OR7 together, the room transformed completely. The walls began showing organic growth patterns that resembled root systems, insect colonies, ice crystals, and something I could only describe as living shadows. The temperature became comfortable for the first time in months, as if the room had finally found its perfect balance. "Dr. Ravencroft," Seraphina said, "we need you to perform one final surgery, not to heal us, but to complete the transformation that began 177 years ago when we were murdered for our healing knowledge." "What kind of transformation?" "The four of us represent the four elements of healing: earth, air, water, and fire. Separately, our knowledge was incomplete. Together we can restore the healing arts that were lost when they killed us." What happened next violated every principle of medicine, surgery, and reality itself. The four women lay down on the single operating table, which somehow expanded to accommodate them all. They joined hands, and their individual supernatural conditions began to merge. Seraphina's roots connected with Cordelia's insects, which began building in crystalline structures that Luna's ice magic kept perfectly preserved. The fourth woman, Raven, began producing what appeared to be liquid fire that didn't burn but instead seemed to energize everything it touched. I found myself performing surgery, not on four separate patients, but on a single entity that was somehow all of them at once. My hands moved with knowledge I'd never learned, guided by techniques that predated modern medicine by centuries. "Dr. Ravencroft," they spoke in unison, their voices creating harmonies that seemed to make the room itself sing. "You are witnessing the rebirth of the old healing. The knowledge that was lost will live again." As I worked, impossible things happened around me. My surgical team began demonstrating abilities they'd never possessed. Ophelia could diagnose conditions by touch. Dr. Cross could induce healing trances instead of just anesthesia, and Celeste could somehow see the flow of life energy through patients' bodies. When the surgery was complete, the four women had become something beyond human beings of pure healing energy, who could cure with a touch, diagnose with a glance, and restore life to the dying. They had become the ancient healers reborn. In the days following the final surgery, Blackthorne Memorial Hospital became something unprecedented in modern medicine. Patients who had been given days to live walked out completely cured. Conditions that had puzzled specialists for years were resolved with simple herbal remedies that shouldn't have worked but did. The four reborn healers established what they called the Sanctuary of Ancient Medicine in the hospital's East Wing. Patients came from around the world, seeking treatment that combined the most advanced modern techniques with healing knowledge that had been preserved for centuries in supernatural form. But the cost was my sanity and my ability to practice conventional medicine. Everything I had learned, everything I had built my career on, had been revealed as incomplete, a shadow of what healing could truly be when the boundaries between science and spirit dissolved. My surgical team had been permanently changed by their exposure to the ancient healing energies. Ophelia left conventional nursing to study herbalism and energy healing under Seraphina's guidance. Dr. Cross developed abilities that went far beyond anesthesiology. He could now induce states of consciousness that allowed patients to heal themselves from within. But I couldn't adapt. Every time I entered an operating room, I could feel the presence of countless other healers who had died for their knowledge. I could sense the incompleteness of modern medicine's understanding of life, death, and the healing process. I began second-guessing every procedure, every diagnosis, every treatment decision. How many patients had I failed to heal because I lacked access to the ancient knowledge? How many lives could have been saved if I had understood the deeper connections between body, spirit, and the natural world? After witnessing 4 impossible surgeries that restored murdered healers to life through their living descendants, I realized I could no longer practice medicine with confidence. The boundaries between life and death, between possible and impossible, had been shattered beyond repair. I submitted my resignation to Dr. Patricia Hendricks on March 28, 2024. "Isabella, you don't have to do this," she said during our final meeting. "What you've accomplished here, what you've witnessed, it could revolutionize medicine. Patricia, I've seen 4 women return from the dead to reclaim healing knowledge that was lost over 150 years ago. I've performed surgeries guided by spirits of murdered healers. I can no longer distinguish between medicine and magic, and I can't practice when I don't understand what's real anymore. The results speak for themselves. Patient outcomes in your wing have improved by over 300% since these events began. But at what cost? I've lost my ability to practice evidence-based medicine because I now know there are forces at work that our evidence can't measure or explain. I moved to rural Montana, where I now work as a family physician in a small clinic that sees mostly routine ailments, colds, minor injuries, and chronic conditions that don't challenge my shattered understanding of what's medically possible. But the four ancient healers continue their work at Blackthorne Memorial Hospital. The sanctuary of ancient medicine has become a pilgrimage site for patients who conventional medicine has given up on. Their success rate with terminal illnesses is unprecedented. Their ability to restore hope to the hopeless is documented, and their integration of supernatural healing knowledge with modern medical techniques has created a new paradigm for healthcare. Sometimes, late at night in my small Montana clinic, I wonder about the other hospitals built on burial grounds, the other operating rooms that might be waiting for the right moment to resurrect their own lost healers. I think about all the women throughout history who were killed for their medical knowledge, whose healing wisdom died with them, and whose spirits might still be waiting for descendants willing to serve as vessels for their return. Magnolia Esperanza Thornfield, now fully integrated with Serafina Moss, sends me updates occasionally. The ancient healing arts are spreading. Other hospitals are reporting impossible recoveries, mysterious cures, and patients who claim to have been treated by doctors who died decades or centuries ago. The boundary between life and death, I learned, is far more permeable than modern medicine acknowledges, and sometimes the dead have unfinished healing to complete. What haunts me most isn't the impossibility of what I witnessed, but the realization that for all my years of medical training and surgical expertise, I had been practicing an incomplete form of healing. The ancient healers who returned through their descendants possessed knowledge that could cure conditions we consider terminal, could heal trauma that we deem irreversible, and could restore hope in situations where we offer only palliative care. I gave up surgery not because what I witnessed was terrifying, but because it was beautiful, and I could no longer accept the limitations of medicine that ignores the spiritual dimensions of healing. The 4 cases that changed my life taught me that some operating rooms remember every patient, every procedure, and every healer who has ever worked within their walls, and sometimes, when the conditions are right, when the bloodlines align, and when the need is great enough, the dead return to finish the healing work that death interrupted. Blackthorne Memorial Hospital's Operating Room 7 is no longer just a surgical suite, it's a bridge between worlds, a place where ancient wisdom and modern technique merge to create possibilities that neither could achieve alone. I couldn't be part of that miracle because it shattered everything I thought I knew about the practice of medicine. But for the patients who have been saved by the impossible return of the ancient healers, my inability to adapt to the new reality seems a small price to pay for the restoration of healing knowledge that should never have been lost. The dead don't always stay dead, and sometimes that's exactly what the living need. If you've ever experienced something in a medical setting that defied explanation, if you've witnessed healing that shouldn't have been possible, or if you've felt the presence of something ancient and wise in places dedicated to modern medicine, share your story in the comments. You might not be alone, and your experience might be part of a larger pattern that medical science has yet to acknowledge.